Welcome to Beyond Immigration Law. This is the podcast that explores the immigrant journey. We're going to talk about cultural integration and then also education and also career development as we have two special guests today. So, I'm your host, Charina Garcia. I'm the strategy and innovation partner here at WR Immigration. I am a child of immigrants. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in the late 60s, and my father came in as an electrical engineer from the Philippines to work for a very large company called Boeing. And that's how my family has been in the US. And today, what we're going to talk about is our global classroom. So basically, international students who come to the US and eventually will stay, and what their dreams are, their skills, their contributions, and how these wonderful guests have provided them with support over the years as they progress through their global journey and their career progression. So, we have two seasoned international student advisors and directors. So, we have Parinaz here, and then we have Andrew. And they're going to share their career journeys and advice for students and also talk about what's going on in global education and also the talent here in the US and international talent. So, Parnaz, let's start with you. Why don't you just give yourself an introduction, introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Charina. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Hi, everyone. My name is Parinaz Zartoshty. I am the Senior Director of Global Programs and Services at San José State University. So, my role is overseeing both our International Student and Scholar Services unit and our Study Abroad and Away unit. I also serve as a Senior International Officer here at SJSU. So, in terms of my career journey, similar to Sharina, I am also an immigrant. My family fled or left Iran. So I'm originally from Iran. We left Iran for a 3-week vacation in December of 78, right before the revolution happened in February of 79. And we ended up staying. I was a child then and definitely had lots of challenges and successes navigating the process of entering a new cultural environment. And that has really driven my career path, although I did start off. So, my bachelor's and master's degrees are in international relations. I've worked for nonprofits, Amnesty International, UNICEF, but kind of landed in higher ed and in international education as I started a family. It was trying to find a balance between my passion and also my family life. But we can certainly chat more. I want to give Andy an opportunity to introduce himself before we move further in the conversation.
Thanks, Parnaz. And Andy, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience members?
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to join this podcast. I'm Andy Shiotani. I'm the Director of Services for International Students and Scholars at the University of California, Davis, here in Davis, California. We're a part of Global Affairs, but my unit provides immigration services, advising, and support services and programs for our international students and scholars. We have about 9,000 total here, and we work to again support the international community, broadly speaking, in the global engagement mission of the university. I'm a immigrant. I'm a third generation Japanese American. My grandparents emigrated from Japan to Hawaii many years ago, and my parents grew up in Hawaii. By coincidence, I actually was born in Japan, in Okinawa, Japan, and grew up there. My father had a job in Japan when I was born, and so I grew up and went to school and went to high school there, and I didn't come to the United States until I was ready for college. So even though I was born an American citizen, I very much felt like an international student in many ways. So had that experience. When I started working with international students, and I started my career in international education a little bit by accident over 25 years ago as a summer student worker in National Student and Scholar Office at Columbia University. Just needed a job, and it became an advising job. But because of my international background, that's how I got started. And that's where, an accidental launch to my advising career.
Well, we're glad you've been part of this community. Andy has telling right before we started our podcast that he's someone I've met who's really has a lot of experience and gives really good practical advice to the students. How about you, Parnas? How did you get into international student advising?
Yeah, so similar to Andy, that's really funny that you mentioned a summer job. I also had a summer job as an intern in the ISSS office of Boston University my sophomore year, right before I went to Paris for my study abroad. So at that time, I-20s were typed up. So and that was part of my job as a student assistant. Like, I can't even imagine giving that job to a student assistant now, but that was part of my job, and that really piqued my interest. So, although I kind of went a roundabout way of re-entering the field, that was my first taste of international student advising. However, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I did enter the field. There was a part-time international student advisor position at a university, and so it seemed like a great fit. I applied for it and then eventually became full-time and started climbing the ladder. It just has been a really good fit because I think of my job more as my passion and not necessarily a job. I think when we are so invested and so passionate about the work we do, regardless of how many hours we have to put in, it's more fulfilling. So that's how I entered the field as well with that summer job.
So you've both been in this for a long time now, like over 20 years. And as you look back on your career, maybe you'll say right now is a challenging time, but what are some of the challenging times that you've faced? And what sort of advice can you give now to some people who are actually in the role as in student advising or who aspire to go into the role of student advising? Parnas, you can just start off.
Yeah, I mean, if I can think back to challenging times, there's always been some sort of a challenge, but COVID was definitely a challenging time, right? If you all recall, COVID was when we all went remote. There was a moment in time when our international students thought that they all had to leave the country because they were enrolled in fully online education. But somehow we pivoted and we figured out a way to manage that. And in terms of managing it, I think it's multifold, right? One aspect is how do we manage our students and their anxiety levels? And how can we ensure that they feel supported and that we as an ISSS office, we are here as their advocates and their allies. So that's one piece of it. And the second is how can we just not be reactive? How can we stay calm and just figure out a solution, right? This is the dilemma we're in. How do we figure out how we manage that? So I know what we did here at San Jose State, and I didn't share our numbers. We have about 3,000 matriculated F1 students. We have probably another 16 to 1,700 on OPT and STEM OPT. So what we did was we held a town hall, and we had thousands of students attend our town hall, but that's what they needed just for us to reassure them that we are trying to figure out what needs to happen for you. And we received many notes afterwards saying, "Thank you for looking out on for us. We're so glad we have you as advocates on our behalf." So COVID is one that comes to mind, but we can certainly go further back in time with more challenges. But Andy has, I'm sure Andy, you have some examples that you can share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, COVID was definitely a learning experience. It was such a unique episode. But when I was starting out as an advisor, maybe 3 years into the job, I was working at Columbia and changed to NYU when 9/11 happened. This was pre-CVIS, but we knew that there was going to be significant change. It was a generational shift in how we were going to be doing our jobs and working and continuing to support students through what was a very, very, very challenging episode and time, in New York City, no less, with everything in the aftermath of 9/11. But as Parnas said, and I was just starting out as an advisor then, and I certainly didn't have the experience that I think I would have now. But for anybody who maybe only has a few years of experience as an advisor, it can be very overwhelming when these crises. but, and sometimes you're presented with situations for which there aren't, strongly written scripts. But my experience now tells me, you're not going to get everything right. You're not going to know all the answers, but keep your balance, right? And work with each other, support each other. If hopefully you have other colleagues who will be there for you, even if they're not in your office, they'll be across the institution. Everybody's rooting for you and rooting for the students. And that resource is really important to rely on because things will get fixed. Issues and problems will get addressed. And we will find a way forward to navigate a crisis to support the students. Like Parinaz, we've been doing, in the most recent events, we've been doing I've learned to do town halls, partly because I realized from my earlier experience that you just need to be there. You didn't need to have all the answers for it. Just need to be in touch and in communication with your community. And that means just as much as being able to provide a solution to a specific issue or a problem. And so we've been doing that. We've been doing various forms of outreach and just being available. I think that's really, really a critical part of our jobs is to be available, to be, to empathize, to share in the uncertainty, but also provide, some navigation through that uncertainty. We're not here to necessarily say that we have the answers. We don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
We are here to help shepherd everybody through this. And so that's what I learned through crisis like that. 9/11 was a really formative one. COVID was a formative one. I will say that there have been changes to our federal administration that has also
Yes.
created situations, right? So that has also created anxiety that we've had to address in different ways using different mechanisms, but a lot of the same issues.
I just want to jump in because Andy, I love that how you shared with regard to communication, right? So we don't necessarily always have the solution, but we need to be actively communicating not only with our students but with other units across campus. I know you belong to a large campus as well, but it's really amazing to see everyone come together and rally in support of our students, but we need to be in communication with them and inform them of what's going on. And the same with our students. So, not necessarily having the solution, but saying, we're here for you, we're willing to listen. And here's our frequent communication with any updates that we have.
Yeah, and I think about the students, right? You get excited, you get accepted to a great university to be able to travel across the world and be an international student. And you're really focused, your goal really is to graduate, right? And you're doing the right things, you're attending classes, you're studying, you're doing all of that. And then in the most recent crisis, it was, their CVIS, which is their F1 student record being terminated. And then right before, like, this just happened a month or so ago, right? So students are starting to get ready to gear up to graduate. And what we were finding was that, some minor indiscretions or no indiscretion, right? Like a speeding ticket or perhaps a DUI was landing them in some uncertain territory, right? And so, as these students walk through your doors in the very beginning, when they're first admitted, right, all the way through to graduation, and as you look at in the career that you've had, what are some of the key milestones or pain points that you've seen throughout that whole process from admission to graduation that you can kind of share with some of the students about what it's like to be an international student and where you have seen just from experience some things you could have done a little bit better to kind of minimize these kind of worries and anxieties. I get it. There's always going to be anxiety, right? But if there are some tips or pointers you could give to some of the students as they go through their student journey, what would you give? Andy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, I'm just reflecting on a variety of scenarios and situations over the years that I've experienced. I think, in our industry, the higher education has changed over the last 20, 25 years, right? When I first started out, we were much more heavily involved in preparing students to get acculturated and adjusted and things like that. The internet and the web, even though they were existing, they weren't as developed technologies as they were now. But I do think that students are overwhelmed with a lot of information. They're overwhelmed with a lot of different sources of information. Some may be reliable and useful, some may not. One of the things I've focused on is moving away from not only providing orientation to students, but a lot of pre-arrival resources, right?
Yeah.
Getting them ready and being proactive and having them prepared so that the first few days or weeks are not a mystery because they're overwhelming by themselves.
Yeah.
And moving to our pre-arrival model where we are getting them really not only excited, but also making sure that things that we can take care of ahead of arrival are taken care of. Things that they need to know ahead of arrival, they're being given that information and the instruction and the resources. The other thing that I think I need to do my own self is to think about how we can reach out and proactively identify students who are at some kind of a critical point in their journey. It could be a family issue, it could be a mental health issue. Very often we don't find out about these issues until they've reached a crisis point. And I think I know I share with my student affairs colleagues, a real desire to get ahead of these crises and get ahead of these points. And so it's not just an international student advising issue. I think it's a general issue for many students. But with international students, I do know that sometimes they tend not to want to disclose or seek resources or help. And that's an enduring puzzle, I think. How can we get ahead of those crises? Because student success, I think the likelihood of a successful outcome for a student's journey, everybody's going to experience a challenge at some point, and really
Yeah.
finding that intervention point, and really being able to support a student through that crisis or through that challenge is going to make a very significant difference in their eventual outcome. And we're still looking for ways to improve how we do that, I think.
Yeah. How about you, Parnas?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the student journey starts before their arrival here. So, what are ways that we can provide them with that pre arrival information, pre arrival resources, but also in an intentional and consistent way so that we're not overwhelming them? So, what are the most critical pieces? I think another piece that is really critical is just the cultural adjustment and acknowledging that that's really important in the international student journey. So we try to address that in our pre-arrival information, at orientation. What are some touch points after orientation? And we haven't really figured out the right balance at this point, but that's something we're looking at. Why does some student end up academically, on academic probation or academically disqualified? When we dig a little bit deeper, we see that there's definitely some issues, mental health issues, but also some cultural adjustment issues. So what are ways that we can prevent that? And I think we are doing a good job at this point because we are providing a lot more touch points. However, we haven't mastered it yet. One other piece that I'm still trying to navigate, right? We're really good at building that international student community. But when we think about our international students, part of their journey here is to hopefully get integrated into the US culture. And I don't think any of us, if anyone has, please share with me, start getting our domestic students and our international students together in an organic way, right? We have buddy systems, we have events, but international students tend to navigate toward the international student community, and that's okay. But I still aspire to find a way to get them to connect more with our domestic students because perhaps that is another way for them to find ways and resources to succeed. So,
Yeah, when I was in law school, my best friend was an international student. She was from Taiwan. And I remember I would say things or like, let's go to Whistler. And then she would say to me, I can't go. And I'm like, why can't you go? I don't understand. Why can't you go? And then when we were crossing the border, she was very diligent about showing her F1 visa, her I-20, getting it endorsed. And then I remember even like with our classes. Why don't you just drop that class? You know? And she'd be like, no, I can't. I can't because if I do, then I'm going to fall below. And it was really interesting that you say that, Parnas, because now that I look back, she was my best friend, but I didn't really understand what it meant to be an international student. She spoke English perfectly well because she had been in the US since high school, right? And there were just some assumptions that we just didn't know as her friends. And then even after, I remember her telling me that she needed to find a job and that she only had a limited amount of time to find a job. So I was experiencing that as my friend being an international student, but not really understanding, how I could be supportive of her, and even when, grades were coming out, how important it was for her to maintain a certain grade, which was the pressure that she had that was different from my pressure, right? My pressure was very different. Like her pressure was if she didn't do a good job here or maintain her grades or her classes, she'd have to leave.
And I think the other piece is how can we educate our campus constituents as well, right? How many of our faculty really understand the international student journey and what these students are going through? How many of our administrators understand that? Maybe 50% do, but how about the other 50%? So, what are things that we can do to further educate and enhance that relationship and enhance that experience for not only our international students, but our domestic students?
Well, that also brings us to the fact that they wanna stay and get a job, right? So let's talk about employment, right? And even about CPT, OPT, STEM OPT. Andy, is there anything that you wanna share or misconceptions that you, the students or the employers, you've always been trying to, clarify about the CPT, OPT, STEM OPT process?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot to always clarify about CPT and OPT in those programs. Before I get to that, though, I did wanna say something else about another employment benefit, which is on-campus employment.
Yes,
I'm
yes,
a
yes.
big advocate for on-campus employment opportunities for international students because, as Parinaz was saying, one of the challenges we face when working with international students, even though we can set up a buddy program, a mentor program, we're always looking for ways to organically connect international students with other students, domestic. But I find that on campus employment is a really underappreciated resource. Not only teaching them career skills, helping to develop their resume, but it's also the interactions you have with your supervisor, with your coworkers. I've seen students really get the benefit of personal and cultural development and they also bring something from their end to the table as well as international students bringing their experiences to an office, to a lab, to a work site.
I heard that's how you get a Social Security number.
And
Is
that is
that
my
true?
social security number, yes, for F1 students.
Oh, okay, so you can't get it otherwise, but if you are working at the university or on campus, you can get a Social Security number?
Yeah, you can get it if you have CPT or OPT, but normally for F1 students, there's a waiting period, right, of an application.
Yeah, yeah,
Not everybody. But you're not if you're off the, just starting off on your journey, getting the on-campus job is also a way to getting a social security number. But I think there's a lot of professional and cultural and personal benefits to on-campus employment, which can then be used
yes,
to support an internship
yes,
and CPT, OPT, STEM OPT. I think these are terrific, terrific programs. We know that there are a variety of challenges, legal and political and otherwise, that we're always watching and monitoring. On the students and employers, and I think we're always telling employers you don't have to do anything. You're not sponsoring them. So it's not as much work as you think it might be. I think though that one of the things that, I would like to do more is to emphasize the educational purpose and the
yeah,
professional development purpose.
yeah,
The student is thinking obviously in terms of their resume, their career, getting a job, which is fine and it's understandable, but it we're going to have to defend it, I think. And the purpose of these programs is really about learning and development.
yeah.
and working with both the student and the employer to understand that. And really trying to embed that. I think with CPT in particular, sometimes it gets very formulaic and formalistic. Somebody just signs off on something and the student goes off, and we don't know if they've learned anything or if we don't know what the educational value has been. And I think we need to re-examine those intentions behind practical training. It is practical training.
Yes.
That mean, and how does an institution support that?
Parinaz, any comments you want to make
Yeah,
about?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I agree that just emphasizing that it is practical training to ensure that our students are getting that practical experience that they've signed up for. But in terms of our students, I know just being in the heart of Silicon Valley, many of our students come to San Jose State with the goal of being employed after graduation or finding that CPT opportunity. And I think one piece that we've had to make sure our students understand is that they require CPT authorization even for unpaid employment. They are getting a practical experience. And so that is something that we've tried to drill in, from pre arrival to orientation to post arrival, that you need that CPT authorization. We want to be extra, extra conservative in all of our advising these days. So I think that's one piece that, students sometimes don't realize, especially our undergraduate students. They tend to fall through the cracks more than our graduate students. But what are other ways that we can, educate employers as well? I know we are collaborating greatly with our career services. So
Yeah.
right now, and the employment platform that they use, they do specify CPT authorization required, OPT or H-1B sponsorship available, which has been really invaluable for our international students.
I have to tell you a story. So my son was looking for a summer internship. He was a junior, and I went on LinkedIn or somewhere to help him find some opportunities, right? And then I sent him some, and then one of them, he says, "Mom, this one you sent me is a scam. They were looking for students who wanted training, and so they asked me all these questions." And that's another thing they need to be careful of, right? Is and it's, my son, he's not a foreign student. And I remember reading the posting and it sounded really enticing, and that's why I sent it to him. But yeah, if you guys could speak to that and
I'm
some of the
so glad you brought
dangers.
that up because we have a few student assistants here who are international students. And, thankfully they work with our office. That's our on campus job. And a couple of them have come in saying, "Hey, I just got a job offer without even interviewing for a position. Is this real?" And then we have realized, no, it's actually a scam. So
Yeah.
scams are really prevalent, and I feel like they've increased even more in the past year or so with job offers coming out without students, and of course, our international students are so eager to find a job, and so they will fall for it. I had one student who fell for a scam and was out of pocket thousands of dollars. So
Wow.
it's bad out there. So that's a really good reminder, Sharina, that and that's something we do proactively as well, is inform our students, just be aware that you're going to be targeted. Now, because of my name, which is very international, I'm also a target of scam. So I
Yes.
can see some of these texts or calls that come through, but not all of them.
Yeah, it's an enormous problem with scams. I mean, I'm almost at the point where I want everybody to take a required class on how to recognize and avoid a scam. We do a lot of education around scams, and I've even heard students though, I know it's a scam, and somehow I'm still fell into it, right?
Yes.
And because these scams can be very sophisticated, they can be very disarming, and it's just incredible the number and the variety and some of the ingenuity behind these scams. It's no surprise that we do also get cases every year of somebody who was a near victim or a victim of a scam, despite the amount of education that we do on it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're doing some education on it because, I've seen the effects towards the end for people who have been so desperate because they're hitting that 90 days, and then they think they could get that H-1B and then eventually get the green card, and then now in this administration, they're actually it's those things are catching up with them. So, I think people really need to be careful, but as we talk about this new administration and all the challenges and all the changes, how do you see your office balancing the compliance and then also what the students need in terms of support? Because I know it can be quite challenging what's going on with now with the CVIS termination, but the students' desire to continue going to school and graduate. So, how has it been for you two in the most recent crisis or uncertainty?
It's a great question. It's one that I'm still thinking about in my mind about how our office's role has been impacted, how our individual roles might be changing. We are in a period where our job is we're not immigration attorneys by and large,
Yeah,
or so even if we have training, we're not working as immigration attorneys. Um, but for a very long time, the understanding between the federal government and higher education institutions are will authorize you to enroll international students as long as you hire staff who are going to be trained properly to administer regulations, and these regulations, while individual cases might be difficult or complex, they followed a fairly predictable sort of framework, that we could understand and we could get appropriate advance warning, appropriate advance notification. We would be alerted to possible developments and regulatory changes. So the recent episode sort of upset that entire cart in my
yeah,
it increased the uncertainty for us as advisors. It also thereby increased the sort of the legal ramifications of anything we were doing. And so the intersection between what I would call standard international advising or conventional advising and just incredibly complex legal issues and questions that it all just started to merge, right? And so
yeah,
we were in daily conversations with attorneys and with legal resources. How much can we say? How much can we not say? Because we can't practice law, but so many
yeah,
things have legal dimensions to it. And so I think institutions are going to have to think about the way it balances not only compliance in the sense of compliance that we normally do as a DSO or as a
yeah,
responsible officer, but institutional compliance. The institutional risk exposure, legal requirements, and things like that. And many institutions just don't have legal immigration expertise
yeah,
ready at hand. So I think a lot of resource development is going to have to be thought, and a new strategic sort of mindset is going to need to be developed about how international offices are going to work with their immigration population. And I'll mention that not only international students in this recent episode, we got lots of questions from permanent residents who are worried
yeah,
about immigration issues, right?
yeah,
So immigration has just become embedded in an unexpected way in sort of the expectations that the community is presenting to us. And then at the same time, we have to continue to be advocates for our
yes, yes,
community,
exactly.
right? And we have to be there in a crisis point to be there to say that, we're going to do whatever we can to advocate for your best interests. And again, sometimes that's what is in their best interest and how far can we go and what are the tools and resources available to us weren't always clear.
Yeah,
So just trying to settle on a new pattern for support when the legal risks and dimension, the legal ramifications of anything we do could be very, very fraught, right? We're all, watching the news for, federal government actions that are affecting, certain institutions, including, Harvard and others. So, those were all considerations and very difficult topics. And we're not necessarily the only ones we can't be the only ones who can sort out the questions, but the answers to these questions or develop the right approach. But I'll stop there. That's what my reaction was.
yeah. How about you, Parnaz?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's been a real challenge navigating the compliance and the advocacy. I feel like we need to work double hard at both in both areas. In terms of compliance, I know in the past we've always taken it on as the International Student
Yeah.
Services Office. Right now, it's more tapping into other resources. Our general counsel, I know we're tapping into general counsel within the system as well, but not necessarily having that immigration expertise in those folks either, although they're trying their best, but also tapping into organizations like NAFSA, like AIEA, and then our immigration attorney colleagues like yourself, Charina, and like your firm has been really advocates for institutions and our students because you are the immigration experts, right? We as Andy mentioned, we are not immigration attorneys. A lot of times students come to me saying, "Well, what do you think I should do?" And my first few words are, "I'm not an immigration attorney. You should consult with an immigration attorney. I can advise you on your F1 status. What I can tell you is your status is now terminated, and these are your options at this point. But, if you want immigration advice, you should consult an immigration attorney." But at the same time, we cannot stop with our advocacy.
Yeah.
I feel like our advocacy is even more critical at this juncture, at this point in time. And that's why we are in the work we do, right? I don't want to speak on your behalf, Andy, but I can, I'm pretty sure that, part of the reason we do the work we do is we care so much about this population. And we truly believe that they add to the US, not only economy, to our culture, they provide more opportunities for other students, our faculty, our staff, and just the United States. We're tapping into their talent to bring to the workforce. So I know that we are passionate, and I know for sure that our advocacy will continue and will strengthen, and we'll make it through this time period as well. But the compliance piece is also equally as important. So making sure that we are double crossing our T's and double dotting our I's and just making sure we are providing as conservative as an advice as we can to our students and connecting them with appropriate resources, whether that's with an immigration attorney or other resources here on campus.
And I think it's hard for the students, to be honest, because, when you were talking, Andy, about the pre-arrival and them coming in, and then imagine they may be in the university for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and they've developed that relationship with your, office, right? When they can come in and they can come and seek advice or counsel, or when I need to travel, what do I need? What I need to do my OPT, what do I need to do? And it's tough for them, I'm sure, and for you when they go to you and they're like, "Well, what should I do?" Right? And you say, "Well, I can't help you. You're gonna have to talk to an immigration lawyer." Right? And when they talk to an immigration lawyer, to be honest, we lay out the options. We can't really, like, what would you do if you were in my shoes, right? Well, I would sue the government, right? But then you'd sue the government. What does that mean? And there's also another factor that I think we're missing talking about is the family at home, right? And the parents, because I'm sure that the parents, I mean, I don't know how much involvement the parents have with your office and whether they're reaching out, because these are most of the time adults, right? They're because in 18 is an adult for us. And I imagine many of the international students are over the age of 18. So how do you balance that as well in terms of providing the advice and the counsel, and then also the cultural aspect of it, right? The family aspect of it.
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. It is very, very hard sometimes to maintain
Yeah.
that balance because sometimes, you are talking to a student about a very fraught situation. They have come to rely on you or your office for support in a variety of ways. And then all of a sudden, the best you can say is, you need to speak to an attorney, right? And that does seem cold, but that does seem unhelpful, but it's the right answer to provide.
Yeah.
That being said, there are a variety of ways you can deliver that information. There's a lot of difference between saying, "I'm sorry, I can't meet with you. I'm not an attorney. You need to go talk to an attorney," versus, "Let's just sit here and talk about how you're feeling. Let's sit here
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, right?
Let's sit here and talk about, what are your anxieties? Oh, I'm about ready to graduate, or I was going to go on to OPT, or I wanted to transfer to a graduate school. And so spending that time, I mean, some of the appointments that I had in April were some of the longest appointments I've had in recent memory, just because it was decompressing. It was assessing what their interests were, assessing how they felt about talking with their family,
Yeah.
as you pointed out, because getting family resources, hearing what they're hearing, and because for a couple of students, it wasn't a surprise, they had heard it happening and they thought
Yeah.
on the information that they got, they thought they might be,
Yeah.
subject to that because they had a speeding ticket or something like that, right? So spending time for them to assess, also spending time to explain why they need to talk to a lawyer, right? I'm not just shuffling you off onto somebody else. But a lawyer or why the university is not doing the legal challenge is because the lawyer is there to figure out what's best for you, right? This is going to be a complicated issue. Making the right decision, you're going to have an expert. You wouldn't ask me for a medical opinion, and
Yeah.
you know, at least, although we seem to give medical advice a lot. But legal advice, you would want to get an expert, right? And I
Yeah.
can tell you what it means for your F1 status. No, we're not taking you out of classes, but it
Yeah.
does mean stopping your on-campus job, right?
Yeah.
And let me see what communication I can help you with to make that easier for your advisors or your supervisor or whatever, whoever you need to help explain what's going on, to lessen some of those communication anxieties that they may have with other people on campus or in their lives, right?
Yeah.
And then doing your best to find and again, referring people to the right attorneys in this last we didn't it took us a while to figure out what was going on, right? So we had a lot of attorneys who just said, "Oh, you're out of status, apply for reinstatement." Was that the right? And there was a lot of controversy as to whether or not that was really a good recommendation. And students didn't go out and say, "My lawyer told me to apply for reinstatement." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. And then, well, you told me to go talk to the lawyer, and the lawyer says, "Okay." But just being willing to engage with them
Yeah.
was really, really, part of the process, even if there's still a lot of messiness and there's still a lot of complexity that we weren't necessarily able to resolve. But seeing that we were taking it seriously and investing, some time and
Yeah.
effort was really, I think, really helpful.
How about you, Parnaz?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you bring up a really good point. Like, I had a few of the students come back and say, "Can you issue me a reinstatement I-20?" Because the attorney told me that's what I need to do. And I said, "No, I cannot issue you a reinstatement I-20." And so it was like, "Well, you told me to go see this immigration attorney." They're telling me. So it was just so complex and so layered, and it happened so fast.
Right.
And incidentally, I was actually on vacation when all these terminations started. So I was on vacation trying to keep track of everything. It was definitely a complex situation, but if I have to think of the positives of what came of what transpired in April, one was it rallied the whole campus, our whole
Yeah.
system around us and our students. So I think I've never gotten this much attention regarding the work I do. I've received so many cards and things saying thank you for all the work, but really understanding what we actually do. So that was one of the positives that came out of this. It also, at least for me, it allowed me to think, "Oh my gosh, we all thought we were ready." Because I know
Yeah.
we had the first the first time this administration was empowered, just thinking, "Oh, well, we know there's going to be some changes. It might be the travel ban," but this was very unexpected. So every day when I go, when I try to unwind, one of the thoughts is, what could be next? And what could I start, planning for. But it's also allowed me to reach out to more colleagues, to do a lot of brainstorming. I don't think I've ever valued my network as much as I have in the past couple months. Just being able to say we're all in the same situation, but what do we need to do? What are things that we can control, and what are things that are out of our control? And those things that are in our control continue to be advocacy for our students, supporting them as best as we can, providing them with the resources we have here on campus. One of our students, you know, um, we were able to provide them with some sort of emergency fund to help them make ends meet. It also, however, brought up another challenge we have with our international students is the mental health stigma, right?
Yeah.
So when this happened, I know that my first part of my conversation with these students was, you're eligible to utilize counseling and psychological services. I'm happy to walk you over there. And all of their first statement was, no, I don't want caps. Can I just sit here and talk to you?
Mhm.
Like, "Okay,
Yes.
yeah, we can talk." And you mentioned these were the longest conversations
Yeah.
I've had with students, but that's all they needed was to sit here, and I have stress balls, and my office would give them stress balls. I said, "Squeeze this and just, yeah, sure, talk. I'm not a therapist, but I can listen to you." So it was just
Yeah.
that active listening so that they could be heard, but then
Yeah.
in the end saying, "Okay, these are the pieces I can help you with, but these legal challenges I cannot help you with. So you're best positioned to talk to someone like Charina or Bernie or whomever." So yeah, those are some of my takeaways from the research.
I mean, that's why I love Andy and Parnaz and why I wanted to do this podcast because they do provide that compassionate service that goes beyond just, advising the students about maintenance of status because it is a whole gamut of, the cultural piece, the challenges of studying in your universities and how difficult it can be for them, right? And the goal of sometimes these international students, their parents, it's very expensive, and they have basically pulled their resources so this child of theirs could have this great opportunity. And as we talk about these students, one of the questions that's been asked of me a lot from people who are not lawyers is whether we think the international students will apply next year and what will it look like for international students? And will we continue to have that talent pipeline? I see it day in and day out, with my clients that I represent. These students that have been trained here bring in an incredible skill set. And when I talk to my clients and they tell me about the challenges of finding talented people, right? And their goal really is to find the most talented people, and they happen to be international students, right? It's not like these clients are looking out and saying, "Let me find just international students." It's the complete opposite, right? Which is one of the myths I wanted to dispel was that employers are looking for the most skilled, talented people that they can find to do the work they need. And it just so happens when they look at the applicants that it becomes someone who needs an OPT, a STEM OPT. So, what are your thoughts about the future, if you can say, of what you think about international students continuing to apply and come to the US? And any predictions you may have, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously a concern, certainly for our admissions
Yeah.
colleagues, for us as well. Um, you know, uh, right now we've had a pretty robust international application season. So what will happen next year, we'll have to see whether or not our students will get visas as well, right? We're
Yes,
concerned about
exactly.
the visa pipeline, regardless of admissions because it will be a discouragement if people get admitted but aren't able to get visas either on time or they get denied. But that being said, admissions trends, I mean, I've heard from students from various countries that, especially for undergraduates, but even to some extent graduate students, these decisions, I'm going to go to the United States to pursue my higher education, are family decisions that are years in the making.
Yes.
And they're very, very hard to just turn around as if, going to England or Canada or Australia all countries that have their own visa and immigration debates going on. It's not so easy just to say, I'm going to re-divert to another country, right? And because you've been preparing for a long while now for higher education in the US as a serious option. And that's what you're going to be focused on. But we could see changes coming down the line in the next year, 2, 3, 4 years from now. In addition to demographic changes, in addition to economic changes, as you know, there's less and less funding for higher education, for example, for research money and research grants, will graduate students continue to come here, right? If
Yeah.
the climate continues to be challenging, will undergraduates? I think these are fair questions. I don't think we have the data right now that shows an immediate impact, but we could see an impact in subsequent years. Certainly, if some of the rumored challenges or actual challenges to OPT or STEM OPT happen, we will probably see very quick responses to
Yeah.
the attractiveness, because I agree. I think international students bring an enormous amount of value and talent to US employers. US employers know that. But if those benefits and programs, those mechanisms to link
Yeah.
education to career opportunities start to be challenged, that's where we're going to see pretty dramatic changes, I think. So part of our advocacy is to continue to emphasize the value of OPT and the value of STEM OPT to the U.S. economy, to our local economies.
Yeah.
We had the privilege of having Dr. Fanta Ov, the president of NAFSA, CEO of NAFSA, come and visit us, and she made the valuable point here that we have to remind constituencies on the ground about the value of international students and the what they bring to employers, the economic benefits, the cultural benefits.
Yeah.
And we haven't done, I think, as enough work in that area. I mean, it's a big job, right, to
Yeah.
analyze what your students are doing, but I think the benefits really need stories about and data about how students are bringing benefits to local communities, much less state or national communities, really needs to be made. And I think we can make it, but we need to have that pivot towards that kind of storytelling and that kind of narrative.
Yeah. Parinaz?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, as Andy mentioned, it's too early. We don't have the data. However, just based on preliminary data, it looks like undergrad numbers are pretty good and pretty robust. It's the graduate numbers that
Yeah.
are looking like around the decline. I believe the guesstimate at this point is about a 30% decline nationally in graduate student numbers. However, once again, everything is cyclical and it takes a while for policies and whatnot to impact the actual, right? So I think we'll see more of an impact in a year or two. That being said, I still know we have so many international students who still want to
Yes.
come to us here in the US. As Andy mentioned, families have been building up their resources to send these students abroad. It's the American dream, right? To get that job and to get that education and that job and ultimately make it back. So we'll see. I think the next open doors that is shared, we'll have more data there to look at. But unfortunately, I do think our grad numbers are definitely going to be lower than in the past. I'm hopeful that the undergrad pipeline is still there, and partly because some of these students started in a community college and now they're transferring to four-year university as opposed to needing that visa. So we don't know what the visa application processes are going to be like. We'll find out soon as it's beginning.
Yeah, and it's like I tell anyone when I speak in any public forum, I say, at the end of the day, right, if the law's on your side, you will get that visa. It'll just be a lot more challenging and you have to be very patient. So things that may have come a lot easier before will be a little bit harder here in this administration, but they just have to have the patience and the resilience to really continue if this is what they really want. I want to thank you both for sharing your stories and your strategies. For those listening, whether you're a international student, an employer, or someone who's aspiring to become an amazing advisor like these two, we hope we offered you some insight, encouragement, and just some understanding of what it's like to be an international foreign student here in the United States. Parnas, Andy, any parting thoughts before we close?
I just want to say thank you for offering this platform to share a little bit. There's obviously a lot more that we could talk about, but don't give up hope. Continue. I mean, if I had to leave some final words, it was like continue with your advocacy, continue with your empathetic approach to our international students. We can come together as a community and continue to make this work. We've had challenges in the past and we've overcome as a community, and I'm sure we can overcome as well.
Thanks, Parnas. Andy, any parting words?
Yeah, very similar sentiments to what Parnas just said, but just speaking to, professionals who might just be starting out in the field as international student and scholar advisors. It is, as I mentioned at the top, I fell into the career accidentally somewhat, but it has rewarded me tremendously, despite the fact that there have been many challenges along the way, things that have happened that you may not like or agree with, situations that are very complicated, sometimes very emotionally difficult to deal with. But being able to support generations of students in their educational, personal, and academic journeys, and being a part of a cultural story, I think, of sharing of ideas and values and experiences and seeing how different countries and cultures evolve, it's just been really, really rewarding. So, despite the challenges, I do want people to be encouraged to stick with it and consider ways of, you know, seeking out their own professional journey and continuing their professional journey in this field.
And if they wanted to reach out to you, where can they reach out and find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can always email me, Shiotani at ucdavis.edu. Yeah, just find me where I'm online. You could do a Google search with me.
How about you, Parnas?
Yeah, same. I'm on LinkedIn. You can search my name, and my email will come up. Says parinaz.zartoshty at sjsu.edu. Would love to hear from anyone who wants to just chat, converse more.
Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Immigration Law on your favorite podcast platform or follow WR Immigration on LinkedIn for updates. And thank you again, both of you, for sharing all this amazing information.
You're welcome.
Thank you.